it was COVID, so I was sitting at okay.
All right. So we'll start the webinar now, Arjit.
Sure.
Hi, good evening. And thank you for doing this webinar with us. So just for the audience here to introduce our panelists right here, Arjit is a graduate from, JSGP. He did his bachelor's in economics in 2022, and he graduated with MA in economics as well in 2024 as well. So, and he's currently pursuing his PhD in the UK. Arjit, if there's anything else you would like to add on to your introduction, so please just go ahead.
Sure. So as you said, I started my bachelor's in 2019 and finished in 2022. And from 22 to 24, I had my master's in economics, both from JSGP. Currently, I'm at the University of Leicester, where I'm pursuing my PhD. Um, my supervisor actually happens to be a graduate of Yale, so I'm quite happy with myself there. My current research is at looking at how a monopoly behaves when you have market uncertainty. I'm leaving it very broad for now because I'm still writing this paper. So once I am able to write the paper, I can give you a little better research question. But for now, that's the best I can give you. That's about it, really. Yeah.
So, Arjit, just to start the flow of the conversation itself, how was the Jindal experience for you? And because, as I got to know, you've spent about 5 years now. You've spent 5 years here in Jindal itself. You've seen a significant amount of change. So, how was the congregated overall experience for you then?
Well, I'm pretty happy because I was able to find professors who were able to see that I had research potential even in my bachelor's. So they have been pushing me towards academia. And because of that, I kind of knew what I wanted to do early on. And I'm quite happy because the whole university has taken its, well, the whole university has done its best to make sure that I get what I needed so that I have the tools necessary for research. Because I remember, of course, my supervisor, Professor Shivangi from JSGP, she always had a big role to play in my research and my general development. But even the dean and even the vice chancellor have often been of extreme help to me so that I could get my LORs and the administrative stuff done. So I'm generally thankful for the whole university because they really did help me a lot.
So, what actually pushed you to pursue a PhD in the UK, Arjit? So how did you actually prepare for it? What was the application process? Is there anything in specific, any documentation required? If, the students here actually want to go and, pursue a PhD in that way. So could you just tell us more about that?
Sure. So I actually applied to a lot of places, not only in the UK, I applied a lot in the US and a few universities here and there around the European Union. Because I remember applying to Stockholm School of Economics, quite a few in the UK. I had Oxford, Cambridge, Leicester, and I also applied to the University of Edinburgh and the Glasgow School of Economics. Well, there are a little differences between the US and the UK because the US really puts a lot of emphasis on the GRE exam. So that's an exam which has English, math, critical skills, critical thinking skills, and I think there was one more component. Well, just English comprehension in general. So they kind of require you to have a score above 160 out of 170 in math if you want to work in economics because it's a very math heavy discipline. The UK does not put as much emphasis on GRE because the exam doesn't exactly prepare you for a PhD because the math is elementary addition, subtraction, ratios, proportions. It's the math you would expect to write the SAT exam at best, I would say. So the math did not exactly help. And the English section is rather difficult because they make you use vocabulary that at least I have never used in my life. So I there is that. Of course, you also have to write the IELTS or the TOEFL exam because India is not one of the exempt countries for English speakers, even though most of us speak English quite well. Most universities require you to have an overall band of six, which isn't very difficult for us. And I don't really know much about TOEFL because I didn't write TOEFL, but I do know that the US prefers TOEFL over IELTS, and the European Union and most um, again, I don't know much about Australia, but again, European Union and New Zealand for sure definitely prefer IELTS over TOEFL. But you write either, it's fine. The reason why I wrote IELTS was because I preferred a paper-based exam rather than an online one because I want to underline things. I want to write my own tiny notes on the excerpts I wrote. So I preferred that. But that being said, one of the disadvantages is that if you have horrible handwriting like I do, you may not get as high a band as you may think you do deserve. So there's of course the IELTS, the TOEFL, the GRE. Then of course your academics does matter because you need to have decent grades for the university to want to believe in you. Then of course, since it is a research degree, and in the UK we call a PhD a postgraduate research degree, you need to have a good research proposal, which means that you need to know how to write. So, well, when I wrote my PhD proposal, it was not very good. I knew it, and my supervisor, the one I have in the UK, we both knew it. But given that I was just entering the research area, it's not that they will not find mistakes. They will find mistakes, but they're very lenient when it comes to finding mistakes. And as long as I see that you're willing to work, which is another common myth I want to get into. Most people think you need to be very, very intelligent or very, very academically gifted to do a PhD. A PhD does not completely rely on being very smart. Yes, being smart always is a good thing. But if you're willing to work hard, anyone can really do a PhD. So as long as your proposal shows effort, that you're at least trying, even if you're making mistakes along the way, that really shows you in a very good light for applying on a PhD. Other than that, of course, you have a general form filling where you have to write your name, your parents' name, your financial income, your family's financial income, so that they can see if you need financial aid. That being said, most PhDs are supposed to pay you. Since it's a research degree and you are going to actually teach for the university, you are supposed to get like a scholarship slash stipend. In my case, I think I got both, so I was happy again. So, of course, going for the PhD without funding is not something I would advise, but some people do it, and whoever can afford to do that, very happy for them because it's a very expensive ordeal. Um, So again, back to the application process. Of course, you have to fill this form. The form is fairly straightforward and it varies from university to university. Most universities have an application fee. The good thing about the UK is that except for really, really high rated universities like Oxbridge, application is free. But in the US, I think I applied to approximately 10 universities in the US. And I think only one waived the application fee. So if you're applying to the US, it's expensive because you have to send your grades to them. You have to make that reminds me. So when I was talking about IELTS and GRE, you can't self-report your scores. You need the I don't know who takes care of IELTS. I think it's Pearson. I'm not too sure. I don't remember. No, it's ETS. It's a company called ETS. They have to send the scores to whichever university you want to apply to. When you finish the GRE exam, that is when you're allowed to send your grades to 5 universities for free. And after that, every time you send it to someone, you have to pay money. The same thing works for IELTS. I think you get 5 universities for free. And then again, you have to pay more. And the more universities you send, the more they charge per IELTS score. I don't know what they call it, but basically when you send your IELTS scores, they have to spend more money on it. Because I remember, because initially when I was applying, it was like 100 rupees, 120 rupees, which is not too bad. It's money, but it's not that bad. But towards the end of my application, I remember it almost went to 300 rupees per application. Well, sending the IELTS to every university. So again, that's something you want to consider because there's a lot of, I won't want to call it hidden costs, but hidden costs in applying for a PhD because you have to think about the application fee, the GRE and IELTS exam in themselves are not very cheap. So they have those. And the good thing about GRE is that it's valid for 5 years. So even if you write it after your undergrad, you spend 2 years doing your master's, that score may still be valid if you have a good enough score. The problem with IELTS is it's only valid for 2 years. So you really have to take it before every time you go abroad. And within IELTS, you have to make sure to take the academic IELTS, not the general IELTS, because the general IELTS is used for getting a job, while academic IELTS is for a PhD. What else did I need while going for a? Of course, you need letter of recommendations. That's very important. So, if you are going for a PhD, it often helps to take a letter of recommendations from a person you write a dissertation with. So, for my case, it was my supervisor from my dissertation. It made sense to do that. It also helps to get a letter recommendation from someone working in your area. So, since I work in game theory, microeconomics, my supervisor was, of course, perfect because I wrote a paper. Well, I didn't write a paper, I wrote a dissertation with her. She works in that area. And the idea of your LOR is just to show that an academic believes that you have the potential and willing to put in the hours to do a PhD. So there again, there are a few school of thoughts here. There are schools of thoughts here. That's not correct grammar. Schools of thought here. For example, if you're applying to Cambridge, it often helps if your professor did his or her PhD from Cambridge because then you make the argument that they knew exactly what you have to go through to get a PhD in Cambridge, and if they believe in you, then the university tends to favor you. But again, it's there's no clear answer on who to take for your letter recommendation. But the thing that worked for me was to take my supervisor, my dissertation supervisor, and it also helped that I took an LOR from the associate dean, Professor Naresh from JSGP, because he has worked around the world. I think he worked in the United Nations for a while, and then he went to the federal government of Canada. So he is well reputed. So I think his LOR helped me as well. Uh, Every university roughly requires around 2 to 3 LORs, so you may want to do the math to see how many universities you can apply based on how many LORs you can get. And one more thing I was told was that taking an LOR from a professor from your undergraduate who has not taught you in your master's, while it's fine, it is not the best thing to do because they taught you a while ago and you're judged on your master's capabilities in your PhD. But that being said, that also changes a little bit now because when I did my undergrad, it was 3 years, and now we have started the 4 year undergrad um, degree. Now, the thing is that the eligibility for a PhD is that you need to have 4 years of university education, which means now you can actually go for a PhD right after your bachelor's, just like how the United States used to do. So I didn't have that option because I needed to finish 4 years of university education, which means you have to do a master's. So there is a lot of change from when I started my journey, but the general trend is the same. You need LORs, you need to think about funding, and even within funding, the university may fund you. And this is a good story because for me, I almost got into Purdue University in the US, but they could not fund me. So they said, if you can just fund yourself, we'll try and reduce the tuition fee, but you'll still have to give tuition fee. You'll have to figure out your own living cost, your own travel cost. And I said, look, you can't expect me to do that because it's a 5 year degree. And and the average cost of living they told me was around $25,000 a year. So that would have been, I think, I don't know how much that was, but when I did the math, it was more than my house is worth. So I could not take such a big loan. And practically, you should not need to take such a big loan because the idea of a PhD is that they pay you to do research because you are actually working for the university. But I digress. They didn't. That's the thing because the US really does not have money right now for funding, which is why external funding is an option because there are a few grants here and there that allow you to get money. So, of course, there is the Rhodes Scholarship, the Phoenix Scholarship. There's one for Commonwealth nations. But again, and then of course, I remember recently reading something about Bill Gates and his wife giving a scholarship. I mean, these are options you have if you really want to go to the US. So there is scholarship options. The university does some things. Sometimes if you go to a country like maybe Finland and Sweden, their government sometimes helps because they have their own set of scholarships where they give you a small amount of money for living and travel cost. So there are options, there are a lot of things to consider. So I think that's all I can really give you in that area because there's a lot of things I said.
Yeah, I think you broke down all my questions into one whole conversation. So, since you've already covered most of what I wanted to ask you, like in small, small parts, I would actually want to, shift to a more cultural perspective. So, we both know like two different countries, of course, two different cultures. So, how did you, adjust to that cultural gap then? Shifting from India to UK, and how is the academic adjustment for you?
I'm so sorry. The accommodation has a weekly fire drill thing where the alarm rings, but they were
I
supposed to
hope
do it yesterday.
everything is okay though.
No, no, this is a weekly thing. They do it.
Okay,
And
all right.
one more joy of being in the UK, you have weekly fire alarms,
Of
and
course,
they
of
ring,
course.
and they're supposed to ring on Sundays, but they rang today. I have no clue why. Anyway, if you could repeat your question because I couldn't hear
Yeah,
anything over
yeah,
the
of
fire.
course. I was asking you about, how did you adjust to the academic and the cultural, differences of, two different countries, of course, UK being one and India, you being brought up in India your whole life, and then shifting to UK, you've been there for a month now. So how was your
A year
academic and your
now.
cultural adjustment that way?
Well, I got lucky because Leicester has a very prominent Gujarati community. So often than not, I am speaking in Hindi here because uh, I think every third person I see here is Indian or at least Bangladeshi or Sri Lankan. So I don't really have that big of a culture shock because I'm mostly surrounded by Indians here. And even when I do, of course, the only real problem I've had in the UK is that the medical system is different than in India because in India, you fall sick, you see a doctor, you get your medicines, and then that's it. In the UK, the NHS works a little differently. You need to book an appointment, and the appointment is usually at least a week after your call. So you kind of have to wait a week, and then they will prescribe medicines, and it's a little difficult to get medication here, which is why a lot of international students bring medication. Even I did that. So I went to my doctor in India, got him to sign a document saying that I need these medicines, and I just brought 3 months worth because that's the maximum I could bring. So that's one culture shock. Other than that, there wasn't much shock for me because again, I'm surrounded by an Indian community. And surprisingly, even London is similar because there are many Bengalis in London, which I mean, I can't say I'm surprised, but it was unexpected. So it's come to the point where I found Indians around me wherever I go. And that being said, the University of Leicester also has this whole I don't know what the equivalent is in India, but here they have like these circles where you get like a international faculty with international student, maybe something similar to your mentor-mentee project you have in JGU, except instead of it being someone going through a degree, it's an adult. So a professor is kind of allotted to you to take care of any problems you have outside of academics. In my case, it happened to be just my supervisor because he is Bengali and he is like, yeah, you're Indian, I'm Indian. You have any problems non-academically, you come to me, and if you have problems academically, you also come to me because I'm your supervisor. So there are systems in place for that, and there's also so again, UK is mostly of Christian faith, so there are many initiatives run by churches here for international students. So I've found one for myself, and we meet every Monday. So it's just like meeting familiar faces. So you don't really feel like you're all alone. So that's there here. I've heard there's similar things in the US as well. So while yes, you'll be away from home, you'll find people and you'll be able to figure it out eventually. Yeah.
So, Arjit, just along those lines only, you talked like we were talking about your challenges only, personal challenges. So, academically, how did you overcome the challenges that you were faced with during the, first week, I would say, or you've already spent a month here. So, during that month here, are there any other challenges that you faced and you overcame?
I've actually spent a year here, not a month. That was
Sorry,
my mistake
sorry.
when I was initially telling you.
Year. Sorry,
No, no, no,
sorry.
it's perfectly fine. So, academic challenges, well, a PhD the first year in if you're in the UK and the first 2 years if you're in the US is coursework, which is basically doing a master's all over again, except that they kind of make you work a little harder than a master's because they expect a higher quality. So the first 2 years is where you'll really have to, well, not the first 2 years for me because I'm in the UK, but the coursework time is when you basically go through your standard microeconomics, macroeconomics, econometrics if you're working in economics, of course. So academically, it's the same as doing a master's. So if you can survive a master's, you will survive this. Once you finish your coursework, that's when you start your actual research, and that's where I would say my challenges really began because you when you come out of a master's, you already have that mindset that look, here's the question paper, here's what you need to write, this is what the examiner expects from you, and you're able to do it. When you start working in research, you have to completely forget everything you learned in your master's when it comes to that mentality because you have to, if you know everything that you're doing in your research, you're either missing something or the area you're working in is not worth researching because you're not really covering a research gap. So the biggest challenge I had is to unlearn my way of thinking in my master's, where I was like, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution, straight answer, write as little as you can and get on with life. You can't do that in research because you have to make sure that every argument you give is well thought of. You have thought of things here and there in the vicinity of your research question. Since I work in theory, which means I'll have a lot of assumptions, I have to figure out what assumptions are needed, what assumptions may make my research less general. So, I mean, you have a supervisor for this, but you have to remember that the progress you will see in research in the beginning is very, very, very slow to the point where you will think, why am I doing this? Am I really doing anything? but you are. It's just that you have to keep on, well, prodding along is the best we can say. Uh, that's how you do research. So that's the biggest roadblock I've had, because when you're in masters, you're like, okay, you read this book, you will see results. And for me, I started my PhD in September. I have not gotten any results worth showing until approximately last week. So September through the first week of August, I worked. And after that, I have a little bit of work to show as research for myself. So that's the biggest challenge I've had, because you work a lot of hours for a very long time, but you don't see how much work you've done when you're actually working. Now that I'm preparing for my first presentation for my PhD, I've seen, okay, I've actually done a lot of work, because I'm summarizing everything I've done over this time, because that's how they want your first presentation to be. And I'm like, okay, no, I've actually done a lot of work. But when I'm actually doing work, I don't feel like I'm doing much, but it's there. It all adds up, I guess. Yeah.
So, Arjit, how was networking for you? You might have attended a lot of conferences or seminars during your time there. Any collaborations or any particular network that you would like to talk about?
Well, the best advice I can give in that area is something which even people in Jindal have been saying all this time. So for JSGP specifically, I believe every Wednesday there is an open lecture, and I'm sure that still goes on because it was happening when I was in my undergrad and masters. That is the best way to make connections in academia. You go for seminars, you talk to the speaker, you ask them the absolute stupid ideas you can have. It's not, no question is a bad question, because as long as you show that you're interested in this person's research, they will start talking to you, and then you'll get your own connection through that. And see, since I work in game theory, I have not made that many connections through the open lecture, because the number of game theorists that I get are not as much as your standard macroeconomist and microeconomist, because it's a relatively less common area to go to. That being said, there are many, many game theorists. That's not a problem. So you get networks through these open lectures, because even if the person you're talking to is not directly related to your research, they may know someone who knows someone who will end up giving you contacts. I also attended a conference which happened in my university for us as PhD students, and I met quite a few people. And I've also met the head of the University of Nottingham. So he was particularly interested in my research, and he was like, look, I work in similar areas. If you need anything, you can just reach out to me. And I was like, okay, I've got a contact there. And while, of course, this is a very, very far-sighted view, these connections may get you a job later if you want to become a professor, especially since I've spoken to the head of Nottingham. Maybe I may get a job, who knows? So there is that. And generally, what happens is that the more people you talk to, they may invite you to their university to speak. And while that may not directly help your connections, whenever you present your work to someone, they find ideas that you may not have thought of. So it kind of helps refine your research, which is why it's always good to go for conferences. And of course, if you're still in your master's, the idea is to network, because that is the way you get into a PhD. Because networking kind of helps you, because if you network, you may end up working with someone. And if you actually have a published paper under your belt before your PhD, it's amazing. I didn't have it. Thankfully, I got a PhD even without it, because usually people either work for a few years and then go for a PhD, or they publish a few papers and then go for a PhD. I had none of that. I just did a master's and just directly went for a PhD. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's luck, because I'd like to think I've done a lot of hard work, but having research done, or at least collaborated with someone as a research intern for a while, it always helps for your PhD, and it also um, kind of helps you with your development in PhD. So even if it's not directly networking, your general growth is there. Yeah.
So, just along those lines, Jindal has this requirement of doing, internships during semester breaks. So, do you believe that might have helped a little bit in your application for PhD also for the UK itself?
It did because, ironically enough, the first internship I ever did, which was after my first semester of bachelor's, was in this it's a research center called RIS, which is run by the Indian, Ministry of External Affairs. So if you have an internship with the government, that kind of makes you look very, very good. Of course, they asked. So when I had my PhD interview, they spoke to me exclusively about that. They're like, okay, you worked with the Ministry of External Affairs. Tell me what you did there. And then I had to, of course, tell them that I didn't do too much because it was right after my first semester of undergrad. So the expectation from me was not that high. I didn't really do anything fancy, but I learned how to clean data. And that is, if you work in data, sadly, I don't. If you work in data, it is very, very good to know how to do that because it's basically grunt work, but it is the foundation, the first step you take when you see data. You download data, you have to learn how to merge data, you have to learn how to clean it, see what you think is relevant, what is not relevant. So that is what I learned. Of course, it's at the time I hated it because it was absolute grunt labor, but now I see it's actually of much use. Similarly, I also interned at PRIA, which is Participatory Research in Asia. So it was of course the middle of COVID, but still they made me go to the Mayur Vihar Municipal Cooperation and I interviewed people. So I learned how to interview people, do qualitative research. So the first internship was quantitative because it's all data, data, data. This one was interviewing people, asking them questions. Of course, I was given the questions, so I never built my own questions. It also is a very good skill to have, but for an undergraduate, it would not have been practical. So they handed us questions. I spoke to people, I asked them questions, I collected their data, and of course, I did some analysis on it, but I won't talk about the analysis because it was very superficial. But learning how to take surveys is also a good skill to have. So I mean, I worked in research centers. I worked up in a startup situation called Cyber EQ in Australia. So that was also nice because it made me, well, when you work in a startup, they expect you to do a lot of things because they need all the help they can get. So I have written emails for people, I have made brochures for people, I wrote a paper in between. Again, it was not publish worthy, but it worked as a writing sample because when you apply for a PhD, you need to give a writing sample. I forgot to mention that earlier. So, what I worked in Cyber EQ was on something called insider threat, which is basically how a person working in a company may end up hurting the company in attempts of making himself richer or more affluential. So, at the time, I was like, sure, another research paper. I guess it's vaguely related to economics, will write it. But now that I'm looking back at it, I kind of used a lot of game theory in that. And that's why it was a very good writing sample because I was like, look, I have researched in this area. The research may not be particularly fancy because it is not novel, but at least you can see that I can write and I can do some semblance of an analysis. So again, if you are going into tanks, sometimes these startups, they are useful. But if you're going for like a job, maybe if you work in like Deloitte or some places like that, if you can get into there, I'm sure they will teach you work ethic. So that may actually help you when you apply for a job in corporate. So yes, internships are useful.
So, Arjit, just to conclude the whole the whole conversation as well as the webinar itself. So, looking back, is there something that you would change, something that you feel like you could have done differently?
Something I could have done differently. Well, yes. So when I had my PhD interview, so what happened is one of my now supervisors was asking me a lot of questions on research, on many papers, and I was telling him, look, I don't know yet because I've not read papers. And he's like, no, you should know this and you should know this. And I thought he was just trying to grill me for no reason. And I was like, okay, fine. Maybe something is missing here. I don't know. So I gave him, so when you don't know something, the most diplomatic answer that you're being taught as a student is that I don't know the answer right now, but when I do, I'll come back to you, because that is what I was taught at least. So that's what I did. I was like, Professor, right now I don't have an answer for you. Once I read the literature a little more, then I will get back to you and answer this. And internally, I was like, why is he asking me these questions? Because I've already told you I don't know. So why are you asking me the same question just in a different way? And I spoke to him when I came here and I said, Professor, why did you do that? Because you knew and that I didn't know, and I know that you knew that I didn't know. So why did you make me do this? And he's like, no, Arjat, the idea is that if I he said he was the bad cop. I don't know if that is what we should really call him, but anyway, he's like, no, I was being the bad cop. The idea is that if I instigate you there, um, you will work. So one of the things you need for a PhD is thick skin, and he was just trying to see if I was thick-skinned enough. So the thing is that in the beginning, I was like, okay, I have an opinion about this professor. Clearly, he does not like me. That was not true. He liked me. That's why he particularly grilled me harder. So the one thing I would really change is that I would actually take what professors say a little more on face value, because initially I was like, okay, he's just grilling me, never mind. But it there was a hidden meaning behind it, so it was nice. And in another thing I personally faced was that I hope we're not going over time, because if I start talking, I won't stop. It's fine. Okay.
We have
So
about like a minute left, so yeah, that's it.
yeah, okay. I'll quickly wrap
Sure,
up.
sure.
So another thing I would do is that if my professor says something like do this, I would just do it blindly. I'd be like, yeah, he said it. He has a PhD. Let's just believe him. After like a year of working, now I slowly started asking him, look, I will do it because you told me to do it, but why am I doing this? So in the beginning, of course, you don't have the confidence of doing research on your own. You're like, okay, new country, new everything, everything is new, and everything you've learned in your master's cannot directly be applied in your PhD. So how do I work? So the most well, not the safest, but the option I chose was to just, if my professor says, do this, I will do that. No questions asked. Now I've started questioning him, of course, very politely. I'm not saying, oh, no, 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 I don't think you're right. That's not right. Please don't do that. But I'm like, okay, professor, you asked me to do this, I'll do it, but why am I doing this? And when he gives you an explanation, I'm like, okay, I understand why you want this, but why can't we do this instead? So now I've slowly learned to give my professor my own ideas. They may not be the best ideas, and he's at least happy that I'm trying to have a academic conversation with him, because he's like, okay, you went from blindly following me to at least trying your own ideas. They may not be good ideas, but at least you tried. So I always had these ideas even when I started my PhD, but I was too afraid to ask, because I was like, okay, he said this, maybe he already knows what I'm thinking. That's not exactly a fair assumption, because my supervisor is just a PhD, he's not a mind reader. So you can't expect him to know what I'm thinking. So even though it's scary, the one thing I would change is that I would be a little more pushy with my ideas than just blindly following what my supervisor said. That being said, his ideas are very good. That's why I'm able to do work. But I would have at least had the assurance that I tried on my own as well, instead of just doing what my supervisor wanted. Yeah.
So, Arjit, this has been very insightful, and thank you so much for doing this with us. Hopefully, we'll do a phase two of this series itself, or if you want to do something else entirely, we could do that as well.
Sure.
And yeah, thank you so much for connecting with us and giving us
Thank you
your
so much for
insights into
having
this.
me.
That is completely fine. We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
All right, Arjit, thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.